She placed a wedding ring on my desk and would not touch it again. That is how the appointment began. No greeting, no pleasantries. She set it down with 2 fingers, stepped back, and kept her eyes on the floor. The ring had been her mother's, given to her on the day of her marriage 30 years prior. She had not worn it in 4 years. She could not explain, not yet, why holding it made her feel she was burning from the inside. Her name I will not give. The details I carry of her case are composite, woven from years of ministry, and I offer them not as a news report, but as a testimony to what the church can do when men and women have the courage to bring the whole truth into the confessional and onto the exorcist chair. I tell you this so that no one misreads what follows as something sensational. It is not. It is a pastoral account of grace working at the edge of the possible. My name is Chad Ripperger. I am a Thomistic philosopher and one of the few priests still actively engaged in formal exorcism ministry in the Latin Rite. I did not select this work. A bishop asked, "You do not say no to a bishop when he is asking for the good of souls." That was many years ago. Since then, I have sat across from people in states that no seminary course prepared me for, and I have seen things that would confirm every word of the Roman ritual of 1614. I have also seen things I am still trying to understand. The woman with the wedding ring on my desk, I will call her Maria, though that is not her name, belongs to the second category. Not because her case was unlike others, but because what she had been assigned to do and how she had done it and the specific instrument God used to break it laid the architecture of spiritual warfare bare in a way I have spent years trying to articulate. She told me over several sessions what her life had been. She had entered the occult in her early 20s through a women's group that described itself as a healing circle. There was nothing alarming about the first meeting. Candles, shared grief, a language of empowerment that sounded in the moment like someone had finally named the weight she had been carrying. That is how these things begin, not with a threat, but with a gift, or what presents itself as one. The enemy is patient and precise. He has had, as Aquinas reminds us in the Summa Theologiae, an angelic intellect operating at full capacity since the moment of his fall. He did not guess at her wound, he read it. He reads the way a surgeon reads an x-ray, not searching for problems, but cataloging what is already there, and he builds every subsequent step around the thing he found. He found abandonment, and he offered her significance. Maria's wound was abandonment. Her father had left when she was 7. Her first husband left at 31. She was told at that first circle meeting. For 400 years, the church provided the laity with specific prayers to address situations in their homes that they could not explain. Most parishes stopped teaching them after 1965. Now, they have all been compiled into a concise, practical guide. Keep it near the door and read the first page tonight. You will find the link to get the book in the description and in the first pinned comment. That she was powerful, that she had gifts, that the reason her relationships failed was not a wound in her, but a weight in her, a weight others could not bear, because they were not equal to what she carried. It was the most precisely constructed lie I have ever encountered, secondhand. It made her suffering mean something without requiring her to confront its actual source. And it aimed that meaning in a direction that pointed away from God and toward an inverted sense of her own potency. Within 18 months, she had moved from the healing circle into a functioning coven. She was never told in those early months that this is what it was. The word came later. The rituals escalated slowly, which is how every account of this progression goes. There is never a dramatic threshold crossed on a single night. There is always a series of steps, each only slightly larger than the last, each normalized before the next is introduced. She was given objects. She was given names, names to call on, names to avoid saying aloud in certain configurations. She was given what she understood to be assignments. The assignments concerned me most. She described them to me with a precision I recognized immediately, not from her case alone, but from the pattern I have encountered across decades of this ministry in multiple countries and across demographic lines that have nothing else in common. She was directed, she said she received the direction through an interior voice that was not her own, and that she recognized later as distinctly external, not a thought, but a locution, to focus her attention on certain families. The task was to enter into proximity with those families, to identify the place of vulnerability, and to work systematically toward the breaking of the marriage bond. She had done this. She did not tell me how many times. She said enough that her face changed when she said it, flat still. The flatness of someone who has rehearsed a fact until it stopped feeling like a fact and started feeling like weather, something that had happened, something she had moved through, something she was no longer sure she could be accountable for because she had stopped being sure during those years that there was anyone to be accountable to. I believe her, every word. What she described is not magic in the sense the word is used carelessly in the culture. It is not Hollywood. What it is, theologically, is the operational end of demonic obsession turned outward, a person who has opened herself through progressive occult involvement and repeated acts of deliberate consent to an influence that moves through her and works on others at a remove. Aquinas addresses this territory with characteristic precision in the Summa, questions 50 through 64 of the Prima Pars, on the nature and power of the angels. The fallen angels retain the full capacity of their angelic nature. They cannot override human will directly. That is a boundary set by God and not crossable. But they can apply sustained pressure, manipulate circumstances, feed interior thoughts that appear to be the person's own, and work through those who have given them consent and thus made themselves instruments. Maria had given consent. She had given it incrementally over years in rituals whose significance she did not fully understand at the start, and in private acts of will that she understood completely by the end. The temperature in my office dropped when St. Thomas Aquinas wrote more than a dozen questions on how fallen angels operate. Most Catholics have never read one line of it. This archive gathers that teaching, the 1,614 rite, and 4 centuries of documented cases into a single reference. Read it slowly, 1 chapter a night. You will find the link to get the book in the description and in the first posted comment. She described the night of her deepest formal initiation. I am not speaking metaphorically. I keep a thermometer because these things matter and because a priest documenting this work needs data points, not impressions. I noted the drop and I noted what accompanied it. A silence so complete it had texture. The kind of silence that only exists in a stone chapel at 3 a.m. when something very old and very attentive is present. She did not notice the temperature. She was still in the memory, recounting. I was taking notes and praying the Hail Mary under my breath, which is not a dramatic gesture. It is the most efficient thing you can do with your left hand while your right hand is occupied. By this point, she had been inside the coven for 11 years. She had, by her account, worked to undo 4 marriages. 2 had ended in civil divorce. She did not know the status of the other 2. She carried this information with the flatness, I mentioned, the flatness of someone who has spent years not allowing herself to feel the weight of what she has done, because feeling it would have broken her before she was ready to let God put the pieces back. The merciful thing about genuine repentance is that it comes when you are ready. The frightening thing is that some people never become ready. She was ready. The break came from the church through the most ordinary instrument possible. A priest she had known as a child, she had been baptized, Catholic, received First Communion, and drifted away before confirmation was transferred to her city. She encountered him at a grocery store, the kind of encounter that a secular mind calls coincidence, and that I, after decades in this ministry, am no longer in the habit of calling anything other than providence. He recognized her. He asked if she was well. She said she was not. He did not interrogate her, did not visibly recoil, did not begin a therapeutic intake. He said, "Come to Mass." She said she could not. He said, "Come anyway." She came on a Tuesday morning. She sat in the last pew. She could not receive, she knew with a certainty, she could not explain that reception was not yet possible for her, which is itself a form of grace, the conscience operating beneath the debris. The moment she walked through the narthex and saw the tabernacle, that interior voice, the one she had learned to obey for 11 years, told her to leave. She did not leave. She sat in that church for 40 minutes during a Mass with 11 other people, a choir of 1, and an organ played with more devotion than technique, and she wept without stopping. She said it was the first time she had cried in 4 years. The voice told her she was destroying herself. She told it she knew. That is where God broke it. Not in a vision, not in a bolt of light. In a tabernacle holding what it has always held the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, the real presence the demonic cannot tolerate. Not symbol, not memorial. The thing itself, in its fullness, in a half-empty church on a Tuesday morning, drawing a woman who had spent 11 years in a coven back into the gravitational field of the only force that had ever actually loved her. She came to me 6 months later, referred through the priest. By then she had stopped attending coven meetings. She had not yet completed what needed to be done. Let me be precise here, because precision matters and because I must be honest about the limits of what I know. I am reporting a composite of what I have encountered across multiple cases over many years, not a single identified individual. The pattern is real even when the individuals must remain protected, and my obligation is to the truth of what the church can accomplish, not to detail that would make a case identifiable. I report as a confessor and exorcist, not a journalist. With that said, here is what we did. The first requirement was a general confession, not a confession covering the last year. A general confession from the age of reason forward, as complete as human memory can make it, accounting for every mortal sin of which she was aware and every occult act entered into with deliberate will. This took 3 sessions spread across 3 weeks. That is not unusual. The sacrament of penance is the mechanism by which the legal hold of the enemy is broken, and I use the word legal with full theological intent. John 20:23, whose sins you shall forgive, they are forgiven them. This is not a metaphor, it is a juridical reality operating in the spiritual order. The enemy holds legal ground over a soul when that soul has chosen him through acts of will, through explicit or implicit consent. Confession, made with genuine contrition and a firm purpose of amendment, removes that ground. The enemy has no claim on a soul in the state of grace, none. He may tempt, he may press. He cannot hold. The second requirement was the destruction of every occult object, every one. The objects she had been given and the objects she had accumulated. I will not catalog them because enumeration is not necessary and some descriptions carry a weight they do not need to carry in this context, were brought to me and burned on blessed ground. I have done this many times. There is always the same grief. She wept, and the weeping was not the same as the weeping at Mass. It had a different quality. The quality of watching something that had functioned as a substitute for God turned to ash, and realizing for the first time that it was never what it claimed to be. Grief and relief together. The relief was larger. Third, formal deliverance prayer, conducted under the authority given me by the local ordinary for this ministry. I will not describe the session in clinical detail because detail without context produces the wrong response, either sensationalism or skepticism, and neither is useful here. I will say that there was resistance, that the resistance was not subtle, and that it collapsed under the authority of the church, under the intercession of St. Michael, and under the name of Jesus Christ as used in the traditional forms of prayer that the church has carried since the earliest centuries. What remained afterward was a woman who sat differently in the chair, lighter, present in a way she had not been at the beginning. Fourth, return to the sacraments as a sustained practice, not a single grand reception, sustained. Regular confession, the examination of conscience, the accounting, the purpose of amendment kept current, not allowed to accumulate. Regular reception of the Eucharist, worthily received in the state of grace. She began attending daily Mass within 3 weeks of the deliverance session. Not because I told her to, though I'd recommended it, because she had tasted what living in the state of grace felt like and had no desire to leave it. That is the most reliable sign of genuine conversion I know. The person stops needing to be persuaded to do the thing that God is already drawing them toward. The wedding ring remained on my desk for several weeks. She took it home at the end of the 5th session. She put it on her finger before she left the office. She said she understood now that her mother had loved her, that the ring was not a curse, but a gift improperly received, and that she had spent 4 years unable to touch it because everything she associated with love she had, in one way or another, subjected to what she was carrying. She wore it home. I have not seen her since the formal ministry concluded, but I was told by the referring priest that she remained in the sacraments. This is what I want you to understand about what she described. The assignment to break families, the years spent directing what she had been given against marriages and children she did not know. I want you to understand it not because it should frighten you, though it may, but because it names a dimension of reality that the contemporary Catholic West has been systematically taught to disbelieve. And the teaching came from within the Church's own institutions. After the Second Vatican Council closed in 1965, something happened in Catholic formation that I can only describe as a pastoral capitulation to the therapeutic model. The demonic was not denied outright in most cases. It was treated as the kind of thing serious modern people do not engage. A generation of priests came out of seminaries that had absorbed the categories of psychology so thoroughly that when a penitent described what Maria described, the default response was a referral to a mental health professional, which is sometimes appropriate rather than a recognition that something in the spiritual order required a specifically spiritual response. Prayer was not their first instinct. Diagnosis was. A Pew Research survey published in the years before this one found that fewer than 30% of American Catholics affirm the real presence that the Eucharist is truly, not symbolically, the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Fewer than 30%. The Curé d'Ars, John Vianney, who died on the 4th of August, 1859, and who spent much of his ministry in direct confrontation with Le Grappin, which is what he called the demonic, borrowing the old French term for a grappling hook, said that the devil trembles at the thought of a soul in the state of grace, receiving the Eucharist worthily. He said it because he had observed it in a small village in France over decades of hearing confession and watching what the sacrament did to the people who approached it rightly. Fewer than 30% of American Catholics now believe the thing the devil trembles at. Consider what that means for the spiritual architecture of the country. The 1999 rite of exorcism introduced permission requirements and procedural barriers that, in the practical experience of those of us conducting this ministry, have significantly reduced the Church's formal response capacity. The 1614 Roman ritual gave a confessor in good standing, with diocesan permission, a broader range of action, and a clearer procedure. The 1999 rite reflects the theological assumptions of its moment, assumptions that regarded the demonic as edge case, exceptional, something requiring extensive psychiatric certification before the Church would formally engage. I do not say the 1999 rite is without value. I say it was written in a climate that had already decided the enemy was mostly metaphor, and it bears that decision in its structure. In a period when the spiritual assault on Catholic families is, by everything I observe, increasing, not decreasing, not holding steady, the Church's formal response is not keeping pace. The no-fault divorce revolution that began with California's Family Law Act of 1969 and spread to every American state within 15 years dissolved the legal architecture that had made marriage structurally resistant to rupture. A sacrament was now treated in law and gradually in culture as a contract with an exit clause. The enemy knows the difference. When the culture agrees to treat the indissoluble as dissoluble, when even pastoral care softens to accompaniment without the language of permanence, the family, which Aquinas understood as the first cell of social life, and which the enemy has understood since Eden as the primary target, becomes structurally vulnerable in ways it had not been. Maria had been assigned to accelerate something that was already well underway. She was not the cause of the collapse. She was, for a time, a willing instrument working in the direction of a collapse that had other causes and other instruments. That is how it works. The enemy does not improvise. He adapts to whatever ground is already soft. I place this before you not to produce despair. Despair is a sin against hope, and hope is a theological virtue, which means it does not rest on circumstances, on survey data, on the percentage of bishops who still perform exorcisms. It rests on God. The church survived the Arian crisis of the 4th century, when the majority of the episcopate had effectively denied the divinity of Christ, and Athanasius stood against the world, Athanasius contra mundum, holding the Nicene faith with communities of lay people who refused to be persuaded otherwise. She survived the French Revolution, which guillotined her priests and replaced the altar with a plaster goddess. She survived communism, which burned her churches across Eastern Europe, and found, 3 generations later, the people still praying in the ruins. She will survive this through the same mechanism as always: ordinary Catholics in ordinary parishes making ordinary acts of fidelity every day in the state of grace, receiving the body of Christ, refusing to let the faith die in their homes. Here is what I want you to do. This week, not someday. Go to confession, a real confession, not a vague expression of general sorrow, but a specific examination of conscience, an accounting of what you have done and what you have failed to do, offered with genuine contrition and a firm purpose of amendment. If you have not been in years, go anyway. The priest behind that screen has heard worse. The sacrament removes the enemy's legal ground. Nothing else does it. Only that. Receive the Eucharist worthily, in the state of grace, after confession. The real presence that the demonic cannot tolerate. Make it regular. Make it as frequent as your state of life allows, and then a little more frequent than that. Bless your home with a priest, using holy water blessed in the traditional form with exorcised salt. Place a blessed crucifix in every room. Place an image of Our Lady in a visible location. If you have any object in your home obtained through occult means or given to you by someone involved in occult practice, remove it now. Do not donate it. Do not pass it to someone else. Remove it. Consecrate your family to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, formally, with the whole family present where possible. This is a juridical act, placing your household under a specific protection. It is not a pious additive. It changes the standing of your home in the spiritual order. Pray the Rosary daily. Padre Pio, who received the stigmata on the 20th of September 1918, called the Rosary the weapon the enemy fears most. He had reasons for saying that, which went well beyond sentiment. Pray it slowly, pray it with intention, mean every word. Find a sound priest for spiritual direction. Not a therapist, a confessor, someone who believes in the real presence, who holds the church's teaching on the spiritual life intact, who prays. Ask around. They exist. They are not plentiful, but they are not gone. Build community with other serious Catholics who share your convictions. The isolated soul is the easiest target. The saints did not run this race alone, neither should you. Form your children before the world does. The formation that matters most does not happen in a classroom. It happens in the home, at prayer, at the table, in the daily practice of a faith that is alive, because the people in the house believe every word of it. God is with us. He has always been with us. The question is whether we will be with Him. In the coming weeks, I want to address something I have watched unfold in case after case, and that almost no one is talking about clearly: the specific way the demonic targets priests. Not through the dramatic assaults you might expect, through the quiet ones, the erosion of personal prayer, the slow cooling of Eucharistic devotion, the theological confusions that arrive dressed as pastoral sensitivity. If you want to understand why the church is where she is, you have to understand what has been systematically done to her priests from the inside. I will try to explain what I have seen.